Okay, good morning. Today we're going through the last paper that's available when I'm recording this, which is May-June 2024, question paper 11. So we'll start from the bottom again. Question 30, Brazil had a balance of payments current account deficit of US dollars 23.5 billion. What policy is most likely to reduce the current account deficit? Okay, so we see in this case, what do we need to do? We're going to need to increase our exports or decrease imports. Okay, so let's go through some of the ones here. So D, reduce tariffs on Brazil's imports. Okay, what's that going to do? If we're reducing the tariffs, which are taxes on imports, that's going to increase our imports, which will not help to reduce the current account balance deficit. It's going to actually increase the deficit. The same effect happens if we reduce the subsidies to Brazil's exporting firms. We're reducing the money that we give to companies in Brazil. So that's going to make it harder for them to export because they're not going to get any free money from the government anymore. Similarly, if we reduce the rates of income tax in Brazil, what's going to happen? People are going to have more money to spend, but how would that translate into an increase in exports? It may not necessarily. So normally if people have more money to spend, what happens is they start to import more. So imports are likely to go up, and the increased money they have for spending may be directed towards the domestic market, which are not exports. So essentially what they'll do is they will start to buy products from Brazilian companies in Brazil, which is not going to help us reduce the current account deficit. However, if we reduce or if we decrease Brazil's currency, what we should know at this stage is that's going to reduce the price of exports. Therefore, the total amount of exports will go up, and it will increase the price of imports, so the total amount of imports will go down. So A is the correct answer there. Okay, for question 29, what is most likely to cause the demand curve for US dollars to shift? So what we're seeing is we're seeing a decrease in demand for US dollars on the foreign exchange market. Now, for you guys to revise, a really good summary is the revision notes that I've put in for Save My Exams. All the factors that influence floating exchange rates are here: speculation, quantitative easing, interest rates, current account, net investment, relative inflation rates. You have to know all these, okay? And then down below, you also get the impacts that they have, okay? So that kind of stuff we can go through later, but this is the most important section, the factors that influence it. So what you'll see, and I won't spend too long on it, is the relative interest rates is something that'll affect it. So in this case, we're dealing with US dollars in terms of Chinese RMB. So a fall in the US interest rates would be the correct answer, and you can just match that up to what's in the Save My Exam notes here. You'll see that if the interest rates in the country go down, what's going to happen is that there's going to be less demand for US dollars to be traded, because US dollars will be essentially moved out of the banks and put into different areas. So here you'll see supply of pounds increases as investors sell their pounds in favor of other currencies, and the pound depreciates, which can be matched up to what's in 29 here. Okay, question 28. What is the intended outcome of protecting infant industries? So remember, this has to be a form of protectionism, and when we're dealing with protectionism, our main aim is always to protect the domestic market. That's to protect firms that are in that market, and it's to protect jobs, etc. that are in that market also. So By protecting infant industries from free trade, to increase the supply of imported goods, that's not true. We're protecting from free trade, so that means that we're going to have to be putting protectionism policies in place, like import tariffs or quotas, etc. So it's actually going to reduce the amount of imports. Will it decrease the competitiveness of domestic firms? That's definitely not an outcome, because we know that we're trying to increase the competitiveness of the domestic market. Decrease the demand for exported goods, that's also wrong, because again, we're trying to get the domestic market to increase, so we're trying to increase the demand for exported goods and for domestic market. So to increase employment in domestic firms, this is the only one that would match up to what we know about protectionism and protecting the domestic market. We're trying to make the domestic market more competitive by protecting them from imports, so that people will switch from imports and move to buying products in their own country. And obviously if that happens, the demand for those products will go up, and then more employment will happen, because they'll need more workers to meet the increasing demand. Okay, question 27. What is an advantage to a firm of specialization at a national level? Okay, so what do we know about specialization? Specialization is where they're focusing, essentially, right? Really simple. They're focusing on what they are good at making, right? And then what they do when they're good at making it, this product or this service, is they will start to make more than other countries, and then they can trade with other countries for the excess. So for 27, is an advantage that we're depending on supplies from other countries? Definitely not. What we're using the resources in our own countries, and an advantage would be that we can make those goods or those services, for example rice, better than another country can. So we can efficiently use our resources to make more rice than other countries could. Greater competition is obviously also not, if we know what our idea behind specialization is here, we know that that can't be the correct answer either, because we're not going to face competition from overseas firms. We're going to be focusing on making it ourselves, hence why we were told the national level. Greater depletion of a country's natural resources, well, just from this you can know that's wrong, because we're asked for an advantage, and that is definitely not an advantage if we start to use more of our country's resources. An advantage would be lower average cost due to economies of scale. So we can achieve it, because that's obviously a positive thing for a business, where we can get our average cost of production to come down through economies of scale. And then we can sell it to other countries, as we're able to make more than they can with the same level of resources. Okay, question 26. The table shows information of 4 countries. What country is likely to be the most developed? Okay, so we're looking at 3 things: population, GDP, and life expectancy. Population doesn't really determine if a country is rich or poor, but GDP and life expectancy does. So what we're going to be looking at is, we're going to start with life expectancy. Which 2 countries have the highest life expectancy? That would be B and D. Okay, and now we'll go to GDP. So we can see that GDP here, right, now obviously this will be in billions, will be 800 billion divided by 100 million, 6,000 billion divided by 200 million. That's going to be 80, I think, unless my maths is correct. Figures are almost irrelevant really anyway, but you can check it yourself. 2 and then 1.6. Okay, so what we can see is this country B, they have the highest GDP, and they also have a life expectancy of 62 years old. So we can assume that they are the richest country from these 4 that are given. Okay, chart shows the population pyramid for a country. what is most likely to cause the pyramid to be shaped in this way? So first of all, we focus on the bottom because we're given birth rate and death rate, so bottom and top. And in this case, at the bottom, what do we see? It's nice and wide. So we've got 6% of the population here, 6 million people, sorry, it's not percentages, between the ages of 0 and 10. Therefore, we know straight away that our birth rate has to be high because we have lots of young people. However, our population in millions, as we get up towards the top here, it's very narrow, right? So we've got less than 1 million people between 81 and 90, same here, and we've got about 1 million between 71 and 80, which is not even a third put together of the amount of people who are between 0 and 10. That tells us that the debt rate has to be high. If the debt rate was low, we would see an extension here for older age groups. So we would see a lot more people who are of an older age. So it's based on the width of these population pyramids. The wider it is, the higher the birth rate is for the bottom, and the narrower it is, if it was at here for example, then it would be a low birth rate. Okay, the introduction of a minimum hourly wage of an industry aims to reduce poverty among low-paid workers. What is an advantage to workers of an effective national minimum wage? So first thing we have to do is we have to understand what is a national minimum wage. It's the minimum amount that people have to get paid per hour. So in China, for example, if we put in a national minimum wage of 200 RMB, that would mean that everybody who's working in a company would have to get paid 200 RMB per hour at a minimum, right? So it's the lowest amount by law that the employers can pay their employees. Now, what happens with a minimum wage? Do people get paid according to their productivity? No, they don't. Okay, that would be piece rate. Minimum wage is they get paid a minimum amount for a certain time period, normally an hour. Now, they could be productive or they could be unproductive, but they're still going to receive the national minimum wage. Okay, firms may look to increase capital equipment rather than labor. Okay, that's possibly true, but that's not going to be an advantage to workers, is it? And that's what the question asks us. So that could possibly happen. If labor becomes too expensive, they may look to use capital equipment instead if the minimum wage increases their wage costs dramatically. But it's not an advantage to workers. Level of employment becomes more dependent on wage differences. So again, that's also not an advantage to workers. So the only one that would be is that it redistributes a firm's income to reward labor rather than the owners. So previously, when the owners were paying people 50 RMB per hour, for example, the owners would have been pocketing that other 150. But now, the government is forcing them to pay people a certain amount, so some of the firm's income will go towards the workers instead. Okay. What is most likely to increase when the rate of inflation gradually changes from 2 to 8%? So we're seeing that we've got pretty high inflation here in 1 year. Now what we need to do is we need to remember, and you can see it in your inflation and deflation chapter. Revision notes and slides are available on OneDrive. We're talking about the costs of inflation. And one of the costs of inflation is the cost of updating existing price lists. Now, they're trying to trick you out a little bit here because we call them menu costs in the slides, okay? And that means that when we have inflation, the price of the goods and services will be increasing. Therefore, the business will have to change their menus, etc., or their advertising boardings or hoardings to change the prices from what it was previously to what it is now. and that can cost a business a lot of money, especially if they've got menus or advertisements put in numerous different areas. Will it increase level of business confidence? Definitely not. When we've got high inflation here of 8%, it's going to decrease business confidence. It's going to decrease the real income of fixed income earners, because their money is now 8% less than it was last year. And the real value of consumer debt also is not going to be applicable in this case. So what we're doing is we're looking to identify which one matches up to the costs of inflation that we've talked about before, and that would be menu costs. Okay, what is necessary for a worker to be classed as unemployed? So remember, unemployment, the definition is somebody who does not have a job but is willing and able to work and is actively searching for a job. So they don't have a job, yes, obviously, that's why they're unemployed. Are they prepared to work? That would be yes. Now, if we think about it, if they're willing to accept the current wage rate, in order to be willing and able to work, they have to be willing to accept the wage rate that is in the market. The problem for unemployed people, by the definition, is that they can't get a job. So even though they're willing and able to accept the wage rate, the employer is not willing and able to accept them. But they are willing to accept the current wage rate, hence why they're willing and able to work. Okay, question 21. Subsistence farming is the practice of growing crops and raising livestock sufficient only for one's use without any surplus in trade. Why is it difficult for a government to measure economic growth in an economy based on subsistence farming? So they even give you the definition of subsistence farming here. Right? We make the crops, we raise the livestock, and we use it only for ourselves. We don't trade it or we don't sell it. So obviously that's going to make it hard for a government to measure how much our GDP is increasing. Because Billy, who lives on his farm, might now have 10 cattle that he's using for subsistence farming instead of 5 cattle from last year. Cattle are cows, by the way. So, why is it difficult to measure? The correct answer would be A, because they consume most of their own produce. So there's no trade, or there's no selling domestically, etc. They make the crops, they raise the livestock, and they use them to eat them themselves, to keep themselves going. So because there's no trade, no surplus is sold to the government. Size of the harvest is dependent on winter. That happens for agriculture, sure, but if we can't measure how much is happening, then all these other factors don't count. Same with savings. It doesn't matter about the rate of savings because we're trying to measure economic growth, right? So we're trying to measure how much is being spent instead. It might give us an indication, but it's not going to help us measure subsistence farming. Okay, what's the definition of a supply-side policy? So what we should all know at this stage is supply-side policy is designed to shift AS to the right to increase our productive potential. So it's designed to increase inflation. Well, that's definitely wrong. What would increase or decrease in deflation? That would be our contractionary fiscal or monetary policies. Is it designed to increase unemployment? Okay, it can decrease unemployment, but that's not what it's designed to do. It's designed to shift AS to the right. And shifting AS to the right is designed to increase productivity. It's to give us more potential to achieve economic growth. Is it designed to increase imports? Again, that's wrong. If imports increase, that means that AD would move to the left. It does not affect AS. Okay, remember our components of aggregate demand: C, I, G, X, and M. Okay, 19. A government attempts to raise economic growth with a policy of reduced interest rates. So they're decreasing their interest rates. What other government objective is most likely to be helped in the short run? So first thing we need to do is we need to identify what's happening here. So they're using expansionary monetary policy because that's reducing interest rates. So they're trying to shift AD to the right. And what we need to think about is, well, what happens when AD goes to the right? And in my classes and in my slides, you guys will always see that we associate it with three things. We associate it with national income going up, with employment going up. So national income up, employment up, living standards go up also as a result of people having more money and more jobs. So once we take this and once we know this, the effect of an expansionary monetary policy, the question becomes really easy. We can see that the objective to be helped in the short run should be or has to be lower unemployment. Employment going up. Okay, and that's because we move AD to the right. So price stability won't happen. Price stability or inflation could happen if we use it. Income inequality, we need to use from our other past paper questions, we can see we need to use either progressive taxes or education and training to reduce income inequality. And to reduce a trade deficit, no, that's where we need to put in specific policies on either exports or imports. We want to reduce the amount of imports that we're importing. Okay, question 18. The table shows the income tax rate paid by workers at different levels of income in selected years for a developing economy. What is most likely to have been an economic objective of the government in changing the tax rate between year 1 and year 2? So first of all, let's see how has the tax rate changed. We can see that it has become more progressive because people who are on less money here are now paying 0% tax, and the highest earners, those who are earning $50,000 or more, are now paying an extra 20% tax here and 10% tax below that. So it's definitely become more progressive, and I literally just mentioned this in the last question. Progressive taxes or education and training are methods of reducing income inequality. Okay, which macroeconomic aim is achieved if a government is most likely to increase a government budget surplus? Okay, so remember first, what is a government budget surplus? That's where government revenue, I'm going to label it as GR, exceeds government expenditure or government spending. So they're going to collect more revenue and they're going to spend less. That's what we're going to be looking for here. So which aim is most likely to increase a government budget surplus? Now, what do we think? How did the government get revenue? The government get revenue from their taxes, right? So if more people have a job, then that means that more taxes are going to be paid to the government. So they're going to have more revenue. Income redistribution, that doesn't allow the government to collect more revenue. It just means that they're changing the way that the taxes are structured. The same with low inflation or balance of payment stability. That's not going to increase the amount of revenue a government is receiving. Okay, 16. What is likely to happen if a previously competitive market becomes a monopoly? So when we become a monopoly, we need to remember what we put in our definition last time, or our keywords. We said high barriers to entry, yeah, one seller, so they can achieve a lot of profit. So based on that, the barriers to entry here, we know that they're going to increase, so we can get rid of A and B. What's going to happen with economies of scale? So we move from a competitive market to a monopoly. We are the only seller, which means that we're going to expand as we grow, right? So our economies of scale should increase. Because we are the only seller in the market, we should be able to we should be able to make our average costs come down. And obviously the size of the firm will increase as well, because we don't have any competitors now. There's only one firm in the industry, so we should get bigger as we control all of the market. Okay, question 15, I've said this to you in the other questions before. Just look over your types of mergers. I'm not going to explain them all in detail. You just have to learn these types of mergers and then you'll always get these questions right. So a clothing manufacturer expands by taking over a clothing retailer. That is going to be forward vertical merger. Okay, and your other types of mergers are given here. Again, just look over your slides in Unit 3 and your revision notes. There's very good definitions of these given with examples. Okay, table shows the cost and output of a firm. What is the average fixed cost? So our total cost is 10k, our variable cost is 8. What does that mean? That means that our fixed costs have to be 2k, right? Because our fixed costs have to be the total cost minus the variable cost. And how do we find our average fixed cost? We take our total fixed cost divided by our quantity. So 2,000 divided by 10 should give us $200. Okay, another cost question. This is unusual. Normally they only give one. Okay, so a firm is fixed cost of $20 and the following total variable costs. What happens to average total cost over this output range? So in this case what we'll see is our output is 10, our variable cost is 20. We're looking for our average total cost, so we need to add in our fixed costs here as well, right? So we'll just go through them one by one. If we have 10, 40, 20, 40 plus 20 is 60. 60 divided by 10 is an average total cost of 6 for a unit of output for 10. When it's 20, 60 plus 20 is 80. 80 divided by 20 is 4. For 30, 80 plus 20 is 100. Divided by 30, 3.3. And then 120, 100 plus 20 divided by 40 is 3. Okay, so we can see the correct answer is that the average total cost falls continuously. It does not rise continuously. As the output increases, it goes down. And we can see that here from our calculations. It doesn't rise then fall, and it doesn't fall then rise. So it falls continuously. Okay, a farmer introduces machinery to help workers at harvest time. The farmer also reduces the number of workers by 50%. As a result, the total harvest increases by 25%. Okay, what has happened? So we've got labor productivity and we've got production. Now we can see here we've reduced the number of workers by 50%, but our total production has increased, right? Because the total harvest has increased by 25. Therefore, even though we've got less workers, we're actually producing more, which means that our productivity has to have increased also. So the only option where both have increased here is D. Labor productivity has increased because we've less workers producing more in total, and the production is increased because we're told the total harvest amount increases by 25%. Okay, question 11. The diagram shows the demand and supply curve of labor for a firm. The initial wage rate is given by WO, so we're in here. And the equilibrium quantity of labor is LO. A trade union that represents all the workers negotiates a rise in the wage rate to W1. Okay, what is the amount of unemployment that results? So this is our equilibrium. We have the wage rate. It looks the same like we would have an excess supply, right? And when we have an excess supply, we know that this area between the new point for demand and new point for supply is the area that represents, or up here specifically, the surplus when we have that, right? Therefore, if we come out of equilibrium, we've now only got this demand for labour and we've got this supply for labour, right? So we've got this many people who want to work, and we've got this many people over here for demand who are willing to give jobs in the case of a demand and supply curve for labour. So that means that our unemployment is going to be L1 to L2. Okay, it's going to be the total area between where we are now for demand and where we are now for supply. Okay, within the same firm, one employee is paid a higher wage than another employee. Which reason for the difference in their wage could be considered discrimination? Okay, so different levels of work experience, that's not discrimination. As you work for a longer period of time, your wages generally increase because you get better at your job and you get more experience at doing it. They have different levels of productivity. Again, one worker that's more productive, I'm going to pay him more. The worker that's not as productive, I'm not going to pay them as much. That has nothing to do with discrimination. It is to do with how good they are at their job. And different levels of education. So take the example of teachers. Again, that's not discrimination. A teacher who has a PhD, they may get paid more than a teacher who just has a bachelor's degree or maybe a master's degree. So education is not discrimination as well, but if they're of different ages, that might be considered discrimination. Because it's nothing to do with how good they are at their job, it's only to do with what they are or how old they are. So that would be discrimination. Okay, question 9, what is the correct definition of a demerit good? Good which generates external benefits, well that's definitely wrong. That's going to be our merit good, generates benefits for society. A good with higher private costs than social costs. A good which provides no cost to third parties or is more harmful to consumers than they realise. So the correct answer here is going to be C. And we should just know our definition of demerit goods at this stage. It's more harmful to consumers than they realise, so what does it do? It generates not external benefits, but it generates external costs. Okay, and the government needs to fix it because we're overproducing it. It does not produce higher private costs than social costs. The private costs are lower than the social costs for B, and it does not provide no cost to third parties because we know from our definition it does generate external costs, so it does provide costs to third parties. Okay, question 8. What could not occur in a market economic system? Okay, a monopolist supplying specialist goods to the market. That could, because you've got no government intervention, a monopoly, if they're really successful, could develop. Pollution created by power stations, that could, because our merit and demerit goods will not be able to fix the underconsumption and overconsumption of them because there's no government involvement. So, government setting minimum wages, we know in a market economic system, governments will not be involved. And private ownership of firms making defence equipment, that could happen also. If there's enough profit in that industry, then we know that in a market economic system, private firms will develop as long as they can make profit. Okay, a firm changes the price of their product and finds that its revenue increases. What combination of price change and price elasticity of demand would it cause this? So without even looking at A, B, C, and D, oh, sorry, no, we need to look at it in this case because we're not told which way the price changes. So we're going to go through these. Price goes down, and this would be inelastic. Price goes down, it's unitary. Okay. Price goes up, and we're inelastic. and then the price goes up and we're elastic. So, like I've put in class before, I'm just going to put it over here on the right hand side again and we can match it up. Put this in class on numerous occasions and I put it in your slides as well. Very simple for you to remember. If it's elastic, price up, total revenue down. Price down, total revenue up. When it's inelastic, price up, total revenue up, price down, total revenue down. So now all we need to do is we need to match it to what we figured out here about our elasticities. So our correct answer should be C, because for C our price goes up, we've got inelastic PED, and we're told that our total revenue increases, so our total revenue goes up. So that's the only one in these circumstances that result in that. If we just look quickly at just an example of another one, D, we got elastic, price goes up, so we know the total revenue will go down, and we're told revenue increases. So C has to be the answer here. Okay, what could cause the price of tea to increase? Okay, what we need to figure out here is we need to do our demand and supply diagrams. And we need to figure out what's going to happen for the price to increase here. We've got two options. Supply could go left, or demand could go right. Okay, so that's what we're looking for from our factors. So if we have a decrease in the demand for tea, demand would go left and the price would go down, not increase. If we have a decrease in the price of a substitute good, what's going to happen then? The substitute, that's a factor that affects demand, and you can recap on these in your slides. The substitute product, let's say it's coffee, they decrease their price, more consumers want to buy coffee, therefore less consumers want to buy tea. So that would also shift demand to the left for tea, and that would not increase the price, it would decrease the price. So we got two reasons why demand would go left so far. An increase in the price of a substitute good, however, coffee increases their price, less people want to use coffee. Less people want to use coffee, more people want to come and buy tea, demand would move right, and the price of our product would go up, which we can see from the demand and supply diagram. So increase in the supply of tea, supply would go right, and we can see here that if supply goes right, the price of the product would go down. Okay, the diagram shows a shift in the supply curve for New Zealand's airlines from S1 to S2. What is the most likely cause of this shift? So we're seeing a shift in supply. We need to look back over our factors that will cause shifts in supply. But basically the main factor we talk about is, if I just give one of them here to you, it's changes in the cost of production, right? And we can see that here in A. If we decrease our cost of production, we shift to the right because it becomes cheaper for us to make the product or the service that we're offering. If our cost of production increase, then we shift left. Decreasing the number of people wanting to fly to New Zealand, that would be a shift in demand. An increase in the price of train and bus travel, that would be a shift in demand also, because they would be substitutes and they are all factors that shift demand, not supply. And an increase in the tax on air travel, that would be a factor that would shift supply, but it would shift supply to the right. Because we're increasing our indirect taxes, it would become more expensive for us to offer our good or our service. Okay, what is not held constant when drawing a demand good for a good or service? Okay, well this one should be pretty simple. The thing we don't hold constant is the price of the good or the service. We do hold all these other ones here, which are factors that will affect demand. Okay, so when we're drawing a demand curve, we're assuming that all these other factors are staying the same, right? There's no change. Ceteris paribus is the association with these. But we're not assuming that the price of the good is staying the same. If you think about it very simply, when we draw our diagram, what we're drawing is we're changing the price level, right? Okay, diagram shows a PPC for an economy. What is the reason for the economy moving from M to N? So we can see that from M to N we're now making more of good X and less of good Y. So would it be decreased unemployment in industries producing X? No. Remember, unemployment would mean that we move from being inside to on the curve, because we're using or making more efficient use of resources, but that's not happening in this case. An improvement in technology? No. There was an improvement in technology, we would see a shift in the PPC, because we increase the quantity and or quality of resources. So is there an increased productivity of workers producing good X? No, that's the same. We would have a shift in that case. So we would not have a movement just in between, which is our opportunity cost when we're moving from a point on to another point on. So it's increased resource allocation to the production of good X. That's why. So we basically decided in this economy that we want to produce more of good X at this time. In the future we may switch back to producing good Y. We're just moving resources from producing good Y to producing good X. Okay. Question 2. A firm is deciding whether to produce good X or good Y for the next 5 years. The predicted revenue for good X is $20 per year, and for good Y it's $18 per year. What is the opportunity cost of producing X? Okay, so we're producing X. What are we giving up? We're giving up 18,000. And how many years are we giving it up for? We're giving it up for 5 years. So our opportunity cost will be 18,000 multiplied by 5, which should give us 90,000. Remember, opportunity cost is always what we're giving up. And what's a free good? So, definition of a free good, if we remember, it's not scarce, and there's no factors of production. So there's no land, labor, capital, or enterprise involved in making it. Okay, no human involvement. So the only one that would match up to that here would be sunlight. Sunlight is not scarce, and there's no factors of production involved in making it. There's no human involvement in the sun being there every day when we wake up. Free samples of a new product, they're economic goods, and all the others here are economic goods, because we would need, for these 3 factors of production in order to make them. Okay, finished.